Today's reading is for Wednesday. We're on page 82, and it's Sunday, June 13th, 1943. Dear Kitty, my poem from Daddy is too good to keep from you. As Pim usually writes verses in German, Margaret volunteered to translate it. Judge for yourself whether Margaret didn't do it brilliantly. After the usual summary of the events of the year, this is how it ran. Though youngest here, you are no longer small, but life is very hard since one and all aspire to be your teacher thus and thus. We have experience, take a tip from us. We know because we did it long ago. Elders are always better, you must know. At least that's how the rule since life began. At least that's been the rule since life began. Our personal faults are much too small to scan. This makes it easier to criticize the faults of others which seem double-sized. Please bear with us, your parents, for we try to judge you fairly and with sympathy. Correction sometimes take against your will, though it is like swallowing a bitter pill, which must be done if we're to keep the peace while time goes by till all this suffering cease. You read and study nearly all the day, who might have lived in such a different way. You're never bored and bring us all fresh air. Your only moan is this: what can I wear? I have no knickers, all my clothes are small. My vest might be a loincloth, that is all. To put on shoes would mean to cut off toes. Oh dear, I'm so worried by so many woes. There was also a bit about food that Margot could not translate into rhyme, so I shall leave it out. Don't you think my birthday poem is good? I have been thoroughly spoiled in other ways and received a lot of lovely things. Among other things, a fat book on my pet subject, the mythology of Greece and Rome. I can't complain of a shortage of sweets either. Everyone has broken into their last reserves. As the Benjamin of the family in hiding, I am really more honored than I deserve. Yours, Annie. And when she's talking about Benjamin, she's talking about a character in the Bible who was the youngest of the family. So she's the youngest of that group. Tuesday, June the 15th, 1943. Dear Kitty, lots of things have happened, but I often think that all my uninteresting chatter bores you very much and that you are glad not to receive too many letters. So I shall give you the news in brief. Mr. Vossen has not been operated on for his duodenal ulcer. When he was on the operating table and they had opened him up, the doctor saw that he had cancer, which was far too advanced to operate. So they stitched him up again, kept him in bed for 3 weeks, and gave him good food and finally sent him home. I do pity him terribly and think it is rotten that we can't go out. Otherwise, I should certainly visit him frequently to cheer him up. It is a disaster for us that good old Vossen won't be able to keep us in touch with all that goes on and all he hears at the warehouse. He was our best helper and security advisor. We miss him very much indeed. It will be our turn to hand in our radio next month. Kufus has a Candlestein baby set at home that he will let us have to take the place of our big Philips. Okay, so Philips was a big radio, and they had to turn it in. I guess the government or whatever that was running things in this war was commanding people to turn in their radios. So he has a baby set, and it's one that, no one knows about it. So they're doing it kind of under what's supposed to be going on. It certainly is a shame to have to hand in our lovely set, but in a house where people are hiding, we daren't, under any circumstances, take wanton risk and to draw the attention of the authorities. We shall have the little radio upstairs. On top of hidden Jews, clandestine money, and clandestine buying, we can add clandestine radio. Everyone is trying to get hold of an Osset and to hand that in instead of their source of courage. It is really true that as the news from outside gets worse, so the radio, with its miraculous voice, helps us to keep up our morale and to say again, chins up, stick it out, better times will come. Yours, Annie. Sunday, July 11th, 1943. Dear Kitty, to return to the upbringing theme for the umpteenth time, I must tell you that I really am trying to be helpful, friendly, and good, and to do everything I can do so that the rain of rebukes dies down to a light summer drizzle. Do you see how she uses words to describe what she's talking about? She's trying to be helpful and friendly and good and to do everything she can so that the rain of rebukes, and that would be the people fussing at her and telling her she needs to do things better, dies down to a light summer drizzle. So instead of lots of rebukes, she's just getting a little bit. It is mighty difficult to be on such model behavior with people you can't bear, especially when you don't mean a word of it. But I do really see that I get on better by shamming a bit. Instead of my old habit of telling everyone exactly what I thought, although no one ever asked my opinion or attached the slightest importance to it. I often lose my cue and simply can't swallow my rage at some injustice, so that for 4 long hours we hear nothing but an everlasting chatter about the cheekiest and most shameless girl on earth. That means that she has a smart mouth, is what they're saying. Don't you think that sometimes I've cause for complaint? It's a good thing I'm not a grouser, because then I might get sour and bad-tempered. I have decided to let my shorthand go a bit, firstly to give me more time for my other subjects, and secondly because of my eyes. I'm so miserable and wretched as I've become very short-sighted and ought to have had glasses for a long time already. Phew, what an owl I shall look. But of course, in hiding one cannot. Yesterday, everyone talked of nothing but Annie's eyes because Mummy had suggested sending me to the oculist with Mrs. Kufus. I shook in my shoes somewhat at this announcement, for it is no small thing to do. Go out of doors, imagine it, in the street, doesn't bear thinking about. I was petrified at first, so she was afraid at first, but then glad. But it doesn't go as easily as that, because all the people who would have to approve such a step could not reach an agreement quickly. All the difficulties and risks had first to be carefully weighed, although Meep would have gone with me straight away. And that's one of the people that helps them with their outside things. Can you imagine being her age and she needs to go and get her eyes seen about? And she can't because she's in hiding, because they're afraid that if she gets out into the world, someone will notice her and realize she's a Jew child, and they will ask her where her family is and come and get all of them and take them off the concentration camp. In the meantime, I got out my gray coat from the cupboard, but it was so small that it looked as if it belonged to my younger sister. I am really curious to know what will come of it all, but I don't think the plan will come off because the British have landed in Sicily now, and Daddy is once again hoping for a quick finish. Ellie gives Margot and me a lot of office work. It makes us both feel quite important, and is a great help to her. Anyone can file away correspondence and write in the sales book, but we take special pains. Meep is just like a pack mule. She fetches and carries so much. Almost every day she manages to get hold of some vegetables for us and brings everything in shopping bags on her bicycle. We always long for Saturdays when our books come, just like little children receiving a present. Ordinary people simply don't know what books mean to us. Shut up here. Reading, learning, and the radio are all our amusements. Yours, Annie. So at least when you're shut up in this pandemic, you can, get outside and play. You can watch TV. You have toys to play with and people to be within your family. And you don't have to share your home probably with someone that you never were friends with and knew them well. Tuesday, July 13th, 1943. Dear Kitty, yesterday afternoon, with Daddy's permission, I asked Dussel whether he would please be so good, being very polite, as to allow me to use the little table in our room twice a week in the afternoons from 4 o'clock till 5:30. I sit there every day from 2:30 till 4 while Dussel sleeps, but otherwise the room plus table are out of bounds. Inside our common room there is too much going on. It is impossible to work there, and besides, Daddy likes to sit at the writing table and work too sometimes. So it was quite a reasonable request and was put out quite very politely. Now, honestly, what do you think the very learned Dussel replied? No. Just plain no. I was indignant and refused to be put off like that, so I asked him the reason for his no. But I was sent away with a flea in my ear. This was the barrage which followed. I have work to do, and I can't work in the afternoons. Then there is no time left for me at all. I must finish my task Otherwise, I've started all for nothing. Anyway, you don't work seriously at anything. Your mythology now, just what kind of work is that? Knitting and reading are not work either. I'm at the table and she'll stay there. My reply was, Mr. Dussel, I do work seriously and there's nowhere else for me to work in the afternoons. I beg of you to kindly consider my request. With these words, the offended Annie turned her back on the very learned doctor, ignoring him completely. I was seething with rage and thought Dussel was frightfully rude, which he certainly was, and myself very friendly. In the evening, when I could get hold of Pym, remember that's her daddy, I told him how I had gone off and discussed what I should do next, because I was not going to give in and preferred to clear it up myself. Pym told me how I ought to tackle the problem, but warned me that it would be better to leave it until the next day, as I was so hit up. That means she was so angry. I let this advice that her dad gave her go to the winds. That means she ignored it and waited for Dussel after the dishes were done. Pym sat in the room next to us, which had a calming influence on me. I began. Mr. Dussel, I don't suppose you see any point in discussing the matter any more, but I must ask you to do so. Dussel then remarked with his sweetest smile, I am always and at all times prepared to discuss this matter, but it has already been settled. I went on talking, though continually interrupted by Dussel. When you first came here, we arranged that this room should be for both of us. If we were to divide it fairly, you would have the morning and I all the afternoon. But I don't even ask that much, and I think that my 2 afternoons are really perfectly reasonable. At this, Dussel jumped up as if someone had stuck a needle into him. You can't talk about your rights here at all, and where am I to go then? I shall ask Mr. Van Daan whether he will build a little compartment in the attic, then I can go and sit there. I simply can't work anywhere. With you, one always gets trouble. If your sister Margot, who after all has more reason to ask such a thing, would have come to me with the same question, I should not think of refusing. But you, then followed the business about mythology and the knitting, and Annie was insulted again. However, she did not show it and let Dussel finish speaking. But you, one, simply can't talk to you. You are so outrageously selfish. As long as you can get what you want, you don't mind pushing everyone else to one side. I've never seen such a child. But after all, I suppose I shall be obliged to give you your own way, because otherwise I shall be told later on that Anne Frank failed her exam because Mr. Dussel would not give up the table for her. It went on, and finally it was such a torrent I could hardly keep pace with it. At one moment I thought, in a minute I'll give him such a smack in the face that he will fly up to the ceiling together with his lies. But the next moment I said to myself, keep calm, such a fellow isn't worth getting worked up about. After giving final vent to his fury, Master Dussel left the room with an expression of mixed wrath and triumph, his coat stuffed with food. I dashed to Daddy and told him all that he had not already heard of the story. Pym decided to talk to Dussel the same evening, which he did. They talked for over half an hour. The theme of the conversation was something like this. First of all, they talked about whether Annie should sit at the table, yes or no. Daddy said that he and Dussel had already discussed the subject once before, when he had professed to agree with Dussel in order not to put him in the wrong in front of the young, but Daddy had not thought it fair then. Dussel thought I should not speak as if he was an intruder who tried monopolizing everything, but Daddy stuck up for me firmly over that, because he had heard for himself that I had not breathed a word of such a thing. To and fro it went, Daddy defending my selfishness and my trifling work, Dussel grumbling continually. Finally, Dussel had to give in after all and had the opportunity of working undisturbed until 5 for 2 afternoons a week. Dussel looked down his nose very much, didn't speak to me for 2 days, and still had to go and sit at the table from 5 till 1/2 frightfully childish. A person of 54 who is so pedantic and small-minded must be so by nature and will never improve. Yours, Annie. Friday, the 16th of July, 1943. Dear Kitty, burglars again, but real this time. This morning Peter went to the warehouse at 7 o'clock as usual. and at once noticed that both the warehouse door and the door opening onto the street were ajar. He told Pim, who turned the radio in the private office to Germany, and locked the door. Then they went upstairs together. The standing orders for such times were observed as usual. No taps to be turned on. Therefore, no washing, silence, and everything had to be finished by 8 o'clock. And no laboratory. We were all very glad that we had slept so well and not heard anything. Not until 11:30 did we learn from Mr. Kufis that the burglars had pushed in the outer door with a crowbar and had forced the warehouse door. However, they did not find much to steal, so they tried their luck upstairs. They stole 2 cash boxes containing 40 florins, postal orders, and checkbooks, and then the worst of all the coupons for 150 kilos of sugar. Mr. Kufis thinks they belong to the same gang as the ones who tried all 3 doors 6 weeks ago. They were unsuccessful then. It has caused rather a stir in the building, but the secret annex can't seem to go on without sensations like this. We were very glad that the typewriters and money in our wardrobe, where they are brought up upstairs every evening, were safe. Yours, Annie. So now they're having thieves break into the bottom part of the building where they are and steal things. And like I said, the worst thing was they got their coupons for their sugar, because in order to get sugar, you couldn't just go to a store and buy it. You had to stand in line with these coupons to show that you were allowed so much sugar per person. Monday, July 19th, 1943. Dear Kitty, North Amsterdam was very heavily bombed on Sunday. The destruction seemed to be terrible. Whole streets lie in ruins, and it will take a long time before all the people are dug out. Up till now, there are 200 dead and countless wounded. The hospitals are crammed. You hear of children lost in the smoldering ruins, looking for their parents. I shudder when I recall the dull, droning rumble in the distance, which for us marked the approaching destruction. Yours, Annie. Friday, the 23rd of July, 1943. Dear Kitty, just for fun, I'm going to tell you each person's first wish when we are allowed to go outside again. Margot and Mr. Van Daan long more than anything for a hot bath filled to overflowing and want to stay in it for half an hour. Mrs. Van Daan wants most to go and eat cream cakes immediately. Dussel thinks of nothing but seeing Lottie, his wife. Mummy of her cup of coffee. Daddy is going to visit Mr. Vossen first. Peter, the town, and a cinema, which is another name for movies. While I should find it so blissful, I shouldn't know where to start. But most of all, I long for a home of our own, to be able to move freely and to have some help with my work again at last. In other words, school. Peter has offered to get us some fruit. It costs next to nothing. Grapes, 5 per kilo. Gooseberries, 0.70 per pound. 1 peach, 0.5. 1 kilo melon, 1.50. Then you see in the newspapers every evening in bold letters, play fair and keep prices down. Yours, Annie. I think she was being sarcastic. So that would be, at the bottom it tells us equivalent or equal prices in order would be $1.40 for some grapes, 21 cents for gooseberries, 14 cents for a peach, and 42 cents for a melon, which that would be cheap in our money today, but apparently it wasn't then. So the prices for anything that was good and nutritious and tasty was very expensive and hard to get. Monday, the 26th of July, 1943. Dear Kitty, nothing but tumult and uproar yesterday. We are still very het up about it all. That means they're very upset. You might really ask, does a day go by without some excitement? We had the first warning siren while we were at breakfast, but we didn't give a hoot about that. It only means that the planes are crossing the coast. After breakfast, I went and lay down for an hour as I had a bad headache. Then I went downstairs. It was about 2 o'clock. Margot had finished her office work at 2:30. She had not packed her things together when the sirens began to wail, so upstairs I went again with her. It was high time, for we had not been upstairs 5 minutes when they began shooting hard, so much that we went and stood in the passage. And yes, the house rumbled and shook, and down came the bombs. I clasped my escape bag close to me, more because I wanted to have something to hold than with the idea of escaping, because there's nowhere we can go. If we ever come to the extremity of fleeing from here, the street would be just as dangerous as an air raid. So if they ran out of there because they were afraid they weren't safe in there, and they're hiding, then they would be picked up because they were Jewish people. This one subsided after half an hour, but the activity in the house increased. Peter came down from his lookout post in the attic. Dussel was in the main office. Mrs. Van Don felt safe in the private office. Mr. Van Don had been watching from the loft, and we on the little landing dispersed ourselves too. I went upstairs to see rising above the harbor the columns of smoke Mr. Van Don had told us about. Before long you could smell burning, and outside it looked as if a thick mist hung everywhere. Although such a big fire is not a pleasant sight, luckily for us it was all over, and we went about our respective tasks. That evening at dinner, another air raid alarm. Excuse me. It was a nice meal, but my hunger vanished simply at the sound of the alarm. Nothing happened, and 3/4 of an hour later it was all clear. The dishes were stacked, ready to be done. Air raid warning. Echo fire, an awful lot of planes. Oh dear me, twice in one day. That's too much, we all thought, but that didn't help at all. Once again, the bombs rained down the other side this time on Schiphol, and that's Amsterdam Airport, according to the British. The planes dived and climbed. We heard the hum of their engines, and it was very gruesome. Each moment I thought, one's falling now, here it comes. I can assure you that when I went to bed at 9 o'clock, I couldn't hold my legs still. I woke up at the stroke of 12. Planes. Dussel was undressing. I didn't let that put me off, and at the first shot, I leaped out of bed wide awake. 2 hours with Daddy, and still they kept coming. Then they ceased firing, and I was able to go to bed. I fell asleep at 2:30. 7 o'clock. I sat up in bed with a start. Mr. Van Don was with Daddy. Burglars was my first thought. I heard Mr. Van Don saying everything. I thought that everything had been stolen, but no, this time it was wonderful news, such as we have not heard for months, perhaps in all the war years. Mussolini has resigned. The King of Italy has taken over the government. We jumped for joy. After the terrible day yesterday, at last, something good again, and hope. Hope for it to end, hope for peace. Kraler called in and told us that the Fokkers has been barely damaged. Meanwhile, we had another air raid alarm with planes overhead and one more warning siren. I'm just about choked with alarms, very tired, and don't feel a bit like work. But the suspense over Italy will awaken the hope that it will soon end, perhaps even this year. Yours, Annie. I'm going to stop there before we run out of time on this one. And then I'll read and put this in, then I'll put in Thursdays. And that will be all for this week, since we'll have a bad weather day this week on Friday.